Welcome to all the governing body members, welcome to our members of the public, and as you will notice, we are today live streaming our governing body meeting, which is exciting. I've got a form of words, just because it's the first time we're doing that, to read out to all, and then we'll proceed with the meeting as we normally would. So if I may, the governing body of Merton CCG is committed to openness and transparency and conducts as much of its business as possible in a session that members of the public are welcome to attend and observe, subject to available space. The meeting, although held in public, is not a public meeting, and as such there's no opportunity provided for the public to ask questions in that arena other than that offered at the discretion of the chair. The governing body meeting is audio recorded as part of our commitment to make information as accessible as possible. The recording is added to our website a few days after the date of the governing body meeting. We are now also live streaming these meetings, following a practice already used by other CCGs, including our neighbour Wandsworth CCG. As stated at our meeting in January, now this arrangement is in place. The CCG will not permit other filming or audio recording of the governing body meeting unless expressly agreed by the chair in advance of the meeting. So to be clear, the use of any recording devices at any time, including mobile phones, is not permitted without the prior agreement of the chair and all members of the public present. Anyone found using such a device without prior agreement will be asked to cease recording and may be asked to leave the meeting. The CCG has also considered more generally how it should proceed in regards to allowing members of the public to participate in governing body meetings held in public. As a result, we've agreed a policy which can be found on our website. At this time, I would again draw your attention to the section on recording of the meeting and the requirement for the request to be made in advance to the CCG and for all members of the public in attendance to be given the opportunity to give their consent. I've not received any such requests, therefore anyone found recording will be asked to leave. So we're planning on making a similar statement at future meetings, but a more condensed version, but that just reflects really our policy and what will now be found on our website. So with that in mind, let's proceed with the meeting. Tony, can you give us apologies for absence?
None that I'm aware of.
Okay, so we're just waiting for Tim, who's expected to arrive. And Stephen, who is also due to come. Marek.
Sorry, Chair, just as a brief addendum to what you were saying now about the recording and about the questions being asked, on the agenda it does actually state questions from the public are welcome. It does further go on to qualify that and will be received at the discretion of the Chair, but perhaps for clarity it should be reiterated that this is a meeting in public rather than a public meeting, and have that qualified. Just so that there's no...
On the agenda, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's noted.
Thank you.
Helpful, thank you. So let's move to item 2 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. So can governing body members confirm that the current register of interests, which you have before you, reflects your existing conflicts of interest and there have been no changes? Is that right?
Confirmed.
Good. Okay, so we move on now to the key items on the agenda, the first one being the effective commissioning initiative. As you may recall, at the last governing body meeting we had a very lengthy discussion on this topic and went through a few of the areas in some detail. What we agreed was that the clinical thresholds work, looking specifically at some of the procedures that are covered in the existing effective commissioning initiative guidelines, where there were proposals to amend those, that would be taken again through our clinical reference group to get a further clinical view, and that those recommendations would then come back to the governing body. So we're in the position of having taken it through CRG, and Andrew, you're going to present this paper.
Thank you, Andrew. The paper and the presentation are designed to do two things. One is to, exactly as Andrew said, trace back over the steps we took last time, the reference off to our clinical reference group, which was a really good meeting. I think it ran for quite a long way and we had quite a good discussion, and that's captured in here. But I also just want to give you an update more broadly about those other topics we talked about. I'll do that perhaps after we've just concluded the business on this paper. So governing body members may recall the long discussions last time. What you've got in the body of the paper is a table which goes further than we did last time. So what it has on the 5th column is the CRG's comment. What's good to know is that the vast majority of changes were supported. That was quite a debate, quite an extensive conversation that got to the vast majority of changes being supported, largely because the evidence base was viewed as being solid and quite supportable. But there are a couple which I think we've got to talk about now as perhaps modifying the recommendation from last time to approve the lot. There are a number which perhaps will need some further work. So I think perhaps if I focus on those, and then at the end if there are questions from the members about the ones we've supported, we can go back to those quickly. So there were two around pain management, epidural injections and facet joint injections. The CRG view, and obviously there are a number of members of the CRG around the table, so please correct me if you feel that it's misrepresented, was supporting in principle the idea that these might be lower value interventions, but because in Merton we don't have yet a comprehensive pain management service, we should not pursue these changes at this time. So until we have a comprehensive approach to pain management and better alternatives to these things, which we know are not necessarily the very best value for money, we should not proceed with those at this time. So that's the pain management one, lumbar injections, and then deeper into the paper you'll find one around facet joint injections. Virtually, in fact, it's page 8. Again, that's the same piece, supported in principle, but not at this time because we need to do some work around a pain management review. So I think we'll do that work and we may then come back to you. Other CCGs have got a more comprehensive approach to pain management, so they might make a different decision. That's their call. So that was those ones. And then the other one which was important was cataract surgery. I think it would be fair to say we've had more discussion about that than most, but it was not approved by the CRG. The CRG was uncomfortable with the policy change put forward. So at the moment, the recommendation from the CRG to this body is that we do not pursue a change in our existing cataract threshold policy. Again, CRG members, if you have a different... That was quite a debate, but I'd say that was clearly the view that came out of that meeting, which is what I've recorded here. Yeah. There was a request, which we had not yet finished, to confirm that we do not fund reversal of male and female sterilisation. The debate there was, I can find no evidence of us funding that currently, i.e. no activity occurs, but we don't have an explicit policy that says we would never fund reversal. I guess the debate went along the lines of there's a lot of conversation that goes into the decision to be sterilised in the first place, so reversal of voluntary sterilisation seems to be something of lower value, but we've got no evidence it happens. One of the recommendations was we should think about writing a policy just to make that absolutely clear. That's not something other CCGs have pursued. I think it's something our CCG is interested in pursuing. The other one, which I'd say on page 5, minor skin lesions, treatment of. Whilst the CRG supported making sure we've got an acute position that we don't do minor skin lesions which are benign, our CCG CRG recommended that we make it clear we don't do that in any setting. So rather than just saying we don't do that in hospital, we think it's of so low value that we should just make sure it doesn't occur anyway, anywhere. So we wouldn't have that asked to be done in primary care as well. In broad terms then, that was it. On circumcision, there was one minor change again where I think the criteria we had suggested was that interference with normal sexual function might be a thing which would give rise to exceptionality. Again, our CRG recommended a change to make that one of the criteria where you could just immediately get access to the policy. So that's just a minor change in wording, really relocating that paragraph from below the line to above the line. So we can do that as well. So overall then, the vast majority were supported with those qualifications which are now reflected in the paper. And so the ask then back to this body is that we approve that to go forward. It will make us a little inconsistent because, to the best of our understanding, Richmond and Croydon CCGs have pursued the whole list. They're in a different situation. We already have some differences, so we will be a little bit variant, but in broad terms we've moved along in parallel with our common CCGs. There is a conversation still to be had with Wandsworth, with Kingston and with Sutton. They are still working this process through. So we're sort of in the middle of the six trying to move together. And once we get past this piece, I'll talk about the how we're working together on a wider range of these sorts of things as well.
So what I'll do next, Andrew, is I'll just give maybe members of the board who were involved in the clinical reference group discussions an opportunity to corroborate or clarify any of those areas. One question I did have was the areas of hip and knee surgery. I know at the clinical reference group, one of the clinical leads was going to go away and get more information on those areas. Has that?
So I think she circulated her comments back to the whole CRG.
So I guess my question to those clinicians on the governing body is, in light of the comments back on those areas, did you feel that then a position where the clinicians were supporting those changes was fair?
Dr. Joanna Thorne did quite an in-depth piece of work and circulated that back, and her conclusion was that the evidence did support the change thresholds, and I think she evidenced that well, and I now feel I could be supportive towards that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's been quite an in-depth process. It's gone on now for a few months. I think very much within CRG we felt pretty comfortable clinically about the changes where it involved just updating our guidance, keeping up to date with current NICE thinking, and that those decisions were reasonably easy to make, but the controversial ones were pulled out and discussed, and I'm much happier things like cataracts are sitting where they're sitting. Clinically I would support where we are at the moment.
And the public health perspective on that?
I'm agreeing with what the colleagues have said.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments then from members of the governing body?
Julie first.
I'll go Julie and then Peter.
Thank you. It's just the minor skin lesions part of the information. Is that so? We're just talking about cosmetic areas here rather than potential.
Exactly right. That it's very much benign skin lesions is our existing policy. We're just looking to extend that.
Yeah. So just for clarification, if you had a benign skin lesion, if it was causing symptoms, or it was particularly disfiguring on the face, it would meet the criteria to have it removed. But it's minor asymptomatic skin lesions. Peter?
Just to say, I'm now much more comfortable with the proposed policy changes now that it's been thoroughly examined at a clinical level. So that gives me a great deal of comfort. But just 2 points really on implementation. First off, are we confident about our administrative arrangements for promulgating the policy changes to make sure that they're being implemented? And the second one is, I imagine that this is probably going to give rise to a greater number of individual funding requests. And I just wonder if the current framework for IFRs needs to be tweaked or amended in any way to cope with this, the potential for a greater flow.
Can I pick both of those up in a wider conversation about what we're doing at South West London level?
Sure.
Because I think with all CCGs have recognised that whilst the clinical review process has been long and hard, actually the administrative side is now where we've really got to focus and probably where the value is. Exactly. So there's quite a process around that, which I'd like to talk to in a second. But I think if I don't answer in that longer discussion, I'll pick up a specific question if you like it during that, if that's okay.
Okay.
Claire, then Merritt.
I do feel more comfortable with this, having had it go through the CRG. My question is about the cataract surgery and I'm glad it wasn't approved. Further discussion required. What does that mean?
It's literally that consistency question, that we'll have now a policy about a different threshold for your second cataract in Richmond and Croydon. We won't have gone with that policy, so we just need to look at the ongoing alignment of these things. Again, I'd like to pick that up as part of this broader discussion, but it's not, I think, further discussion for us to worry about in the next number of months. I think let's call that one parked for a considerable period of time. I believe there might be sort of new nice guidance in the not too distant future.
Exactly.
So let's wait and see what that delivers, because it may be that the whole of South West London has an opportunity to revisit that together on a much more thorough review.
Marek.
Thank you, Chair. Three very brief points. First off, with the reversal of female and male sterilisation, obviously there isn't any current criteria to fall back on. I would just draw attention to the situation where there may be a particular change in personal circumstances in a family setting where such a reversal may actually prove to be of benefit to the subject. So that's number one. Number two, just picking up Peter's comments about the individual funding requests. Certainly GPs will be needing to have very clear support with this, particularly as all too often GPs are asked to complete these requests rather than the consultants, whereas in fact the consultants have the specialist knowledge and are able to actually advise whether such a procedure is necessary. And I think this is really something that we need to explore and discuss firmly, because I think it is repeated across most of Merton that there's a tussle between consultants and GPs who actually is responsible for doing that. And just very final third point on page 10 of the report, which is very interesting. Just wanted to pick up Richmond and Merton CCG hosted a GP and provider workshop. It may simply be because I'm getting old and I can't remember, but when was this and who was invited to it? And how many GPs actually attended that workshop? Are you able to say?
So I think Andrew co-chaired that workshop, and I think Carrie and Karen from this side came to it. That was the one over at Twickenham in October, yes, from memory. And
I think actually Richmond hosted it and invited us to attend and share, and Karen Worthington and I attended.
Yeah, and I think perhaps 10 or so GPs from Richmond. We invited all the major trusts with a month's notice, and the medical director from Kingston Hospital came, a couple of people from Shell West. No one from St George's was available apparently, so we missed them, and I don't think anyone from Swelliot could make it either. So, but we had it was quite a half day of good conversation.
So the Merton GP representation was Karen and Carrie?
Yes, plus Andrew.
Of course, sorry, Andrew.
So, in terms of the first question around process, etc., you're going to pick that up?
Yes, I think I will.
Yeah,
if that's all right.
Okay. So, can I then ask? The recommendation is that we, as a governing body, approve the proposed changes, and also delegate to the chair and accountable officer the ability to approve minor amendments and clarifications to the policies as they're finalised. That's presumably to bring it in line with any changes that Wandsworth or other CCGs might do in terms of tweaking the wording. Is that right?
Exactly, and also just those changes the CRG recommended, for certain we have to play through. We also haven't yet updated the introduction section that says, so for this latest version, we followed this accelerated process, and we need to just recognise all those points of consultation we've had so far. So that's the sort of minor amendment. We're not going to play with the technical components again without sort of working those around.
So are we as a governing body happy to approve that?
Yep.
Is that
Agreed.
everyone? Yes.
Agreed.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. And then you're going to move on to the verbal update.
Yes, if that's okay. So I might first deal with the process questions. It is fair to say that there's a bit of a patchwork of how this process works at the moment. In essence, we've described those 7 steps before, that you need to have a set of policies. Your referrers, which is not just GPs, because we tend to a bit fixate on GPs, it's optometrists, and in some cases it's consultant to consultants, need to be aware of these policies. They are not easy to read, and we haven't really developed much supporting material for them. So that is clearly something that collectively, given that most of these policies are shared across South West London, we can do much better. So that's a work stream that we will kick off. By the way, Zolly, who has been our PMO lead, who's in the room, and until quite recently just working for Merton, we've backfilled Zolly, and Zolly is going to be the South West London project lead on pulling all this together. So we've got a good connection point in. So South West London is making investment across all 6 CCGs in starting to bring together this process on a common basis. That's the thing we've been lacking all this way along, because even just trying to drive a common view on the policies has been a bit hard to do. Now we've got someone working the policy and the procedure side, that would be very helpful. So we need to make sure GPs understand it. We need to embed that in our DXS process. So our new DXS system that will come out already has the existing policies being written up into it. Now we know what changes we're going to make. We can embed those changes in that DXS piece as well, which should help make it easier for good quality referrals to go through. We also need to make sure that our RMS service, which should come online through April and May, is absolutely across all of these policies and procedures. So that what we're trying to do as much as possible is to catch referrals before they go to the acute system, which are clearly inappropriate. But we also know, as I think we've talked about a couple of times, a lot of referrals will go through where we don't exactly know what the treatment will be. We then need to make sure inside the acute hospitals we have some sort of system of stopping them from doing procedures, or at least making sure the thresholds have been improved before they do the procedure. And again, my example I keep giving is we have an existing policy around asymptomatic gallstones that says you don't do this unless there's an IFR. We did 48 of those procedures last year and had no IFRs in relation to asymptomatic gallstones, which cost us £100,000. So if we had a prior approval system in place, which is a contractual mechanism with the hospital, where the hospital had to say, I'm about to do an asymptomatic gallstone, do I pass all those tests? And if they don't pass the tests and they do the procedure, we won't pay, which would be, again, a contractual challenge. We can stop that inappropriate activity, which is really the goal. So we would need to serve notice on acute providers, and in our issue is we're not the lead commissioner for those acute providers, so we need Wandsworth to agree to do this for St George's, we need Kingston to agree to do this for Kingston, and we need Sutton to agree to do this for Epsoms and Heliers. We can serve that process, and only by doing this together will we make it work, because if they don't sign up to that, then we're not going to make it happen, and the trust will legitimately push back and say this is burdensome. So that's again one of these objectives that we've got to do collectively to make sure this works. Kinesis will also play its part, which was one of the other systems that will come out soon, which is advice and guidance to help GPs make sure they only send those referrals through that really do work. And ultimately, we need to boost the business intelligence, the challenge mechanism around the place, to make sure if there are procedures being done which have not passed the prior approvals tests, we can challenge and not pay for that activity and bring that into the contractual mix. So all of those things are now being pursued at a South West London level. We have together up-commissioned the CSU. It will probably cost us about £20,000 a year or so to up-commission them to help us with the prior approval piece, because our CSU already does for us the individual funding request process, so they own that process and administer it. They already own the contracts and BI piece, so they should be able to do the data matching to show that that referral going through was checked through the RMC, was then the prior approval piece completed, and can do the match that says, yep, a procedure has occurred, I can see the individual funding request, or I can see the prior approval, and therefore it's safe to pay. And if the trust can't evidence that, we shouldn't pay, we should challenge back and make sure that ultimately we drive out those non-compliant activities. And that's where the value is in all of this stuff, that I think at the moment we haven't got an end-to-end system. So we've got our project manager, we've up-commissioned our provider, we're doing it at scale across South West London, and there's an absolute commitment as far as possible to take that existing version absolutely into all trusts effective 1 April. And okay, we're going to get a little bit of pushback from the trusts because they'll talk to the administrative burden, but this is something that, for example, Chelsea and Westminster, our provider, already does for North West London. It's not too much of a stretch to ask them to do it for South West London too. In St George's, they're already starting to threaten to push back non-compliant referrals because they understand that they're at risk of not being paid, and that's the last thing they want to do, is to do activity where they're not going to get paid, which is, no one wants that outcome. This is how we can actually make the system work together and make clinical choices about what we don't do in order to create capacity to do the things we do.
Can I just say that you said it was being live streamed, it's not actually working. I've had messages from about 5 people saying they can't get it, they're getting an animated logo and no live streaming. So you're stopping everyone else filming it and it's not being live streamed.
It is being recorded though, so we can put the recording out.
The recording of the last meeting didn't go on the website for a very long time.
Okay, well, I mean, what we'll have to do what we can do technically. It's being audio recorded and video recorded, so we can certainly make sure it's available after the meeting. Apologies if the live stream isn't working, but
Well, that's not working, and the recordings aren't going up until such a long time after the meeting.
okay. Well, let me. I'll ask our communication lead to pick that up with you after the meeting.
Okay.
I can only apologise that it's not working. Dagmar.
Can I just comment around the process? So I think we were all sort of nodding in appreciation because we've talked quite a lot around strengthening the process of actually implementing the policy, and that is, for me, really important to stress that it is for the benefit of the patient. Yeah, so that is the driver number one. We sometimes forget that, and therefore, when we sharpen the processes of implementation, it is very important that the patient doesn't get caught out in prior approval processes that hinder or delays. And for me, that's quite an important point to make.
It is. So can I talk to two more points and then perhaps we can talk about this overall.
Okay.
So the other thing that we have decided as a commissioning system, the 6 CCGs, is that we would like to aim for, so you've heard lots of different version numbers. We're currently running version 1.7.2. This will be version, let's call it 1.8 or something like that. Let's try to aim for a process over the next 6 to 9 months to get to version 2.0, which is absolutely common, absolutely reflects the latest thinking on NICE and everything, and is absolutely best practice that we can possibly get to, and supports DXS and Kinesis, and is just an easier to use piece. That is a thought, and Zolly is going to help us turn that into a project plan. We know we need to get all 6 CCGs signed up, providers signed up, public health signed up, and to do a big comms and engagement piece about what that change might look like, and to match it all up. So that's going to be quite a considerable piece of work that's going to need quite a bit of investment from around the system, but I think that's the way we can possibly deal with some of the shortcomings of the approach, which has been a little bit fragmented to date, it would be fair to say. So if we can push that forward over the next 6 to 9 months, version 2.0 could emerge, which might be a bit more robust in some ways and a bit more consistent. And then lastly, just to sort of, one of the other questions that were asked before was, how are you consulting and engaging on the whole range of changes and topics we've got? So far we've had 15 engagement events, and again, I don't necessarily want to read them all out. There's another 26 to go. So by the time we complete this process, and for example, we come back in March and perhaps talk about a change in IVF policy, we will have met with 41 groups in Merton, including, again, people of different ethnicities, people of different sexualities, etc., etc. We've got lots of representative groups, and it's being supported by this document, and we have hard copies available now. We have printed a number, but not an excessive number, because we don't want to waste money on paper. There is an electronic version on our website, and there's a survey about the choices, which is both in hard copy and on the website. I understand that that's being quite sort of extensively rolled out. So that's our consultation document that does cover some of the meds management changes, covers IVF, and covers just in general our program of change that we're looking at the moment. So I would commend that to the governing body. I'd encourage you to, if you can, have a chance to read it and to promote it to the groups that you know around the place as well, to make sure it's available. So we've got plenty available. Please talk to Abbas or Michelle, our comms people, to make sure you've got copies available if you'd like them. Okay, let me just open it up. Marat, you indicated you had a question.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to reiterate Dagmar's comment that this is very much patient-focused and for the patient's benefit rather than for anything else. But coming back to the issue of the IFRs, that's exactly why also we need to have clarity around those. GP filling in an IFR rather on the hoof because they haven't got the knowledge may jeopardise actually the IFR being approved on the one hand, and also the GP is likely to take significantly longer, or any discussion between the GP and the specialist who is responsible for that may actually delay implementation of treatment. So I think this is really going to need to be very, very clearly worked out.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Carrie?
I just wanted to say I think it's really welcome that we move towards version 2.0 that's owned across the whole of South West London, but that this isn't a one-off piece of work, it has to be ongoing, because guidance changes all the time, new nice guidance comes out, so there will be a necessary resource to ensure that it's constantly updated.
Claire?
I wanted to comment on the Have Your Say and the meetings that are taking place across the borough. It's been, I'm impressed by how comprehensive this piece of work has been and is continuing to be, and the level of the variety of groups that are being visited and talked to about these really important issues for people in the borough. I suppose, I know some visits have already taken place. Have we got any early sense of flavours of what people are saying?
Obviously, it's early days. For example, the survey's only been live for a small number of days, so there's only a very small number of responses. I think people are really excited that we're actually out and talking to them in all sorts of different places. And some of the sessions have been really well attended. There's a sort of a photo doing the rounds at the moment of our consultation lead, who's a guy built a bit like me at the Tamil community, where he looks like a giant amongst a sort of 40-odd people who attended. So that it's great that we're sort of reaching some of those groups who possibly we wouldn't always talk to, and that they had a really good conversation about these things. And there's obviously mixed opinions, but a surprisingly high amount of support of the process, and people coming to understand that we do have to make some of these sort of prioritisation choices, and that they're glad that they're being asked their opinion to and input. We're seeking input from them about how we make those work. There'll be a much more formal report on that at the next governing body meeting, where we'll actually write up what we've done. We'll incorporate the survey results and those sorts of things. So we'll have, quite a comprehensive report for you there. But it's going really well so far.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. We're running slightly behind time, so I'll move us straight on to 3.2, which is the item on the devolution memorandum of understanding, which we have seen before, and we saw a question and answer sort of sheet at the last governing body meeting, but this is asking us now to formally agree it. I think we're the only CCG in London who has yet to agree this, is that right?
So, and really what we're asking for is permission for you to sign this, because it will become final in the end of March. It needs the governing body's sort of consent to allow you to sign on our behalf, essentially just to get started. It's the very early days. We're nowhere near as far along as some other parts of England in devolution. It's just early days of exploring how that might work. And there's some opportunities around it. There don't seem to be any really obvious risks at this stage of entering into the memorandum.
Peter, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. I'll preface it by saying I'm not going to vote against this, but I do want to record that I still remain very sceptical about this. What we've got in front of us is a document which is 21 pages long, and it's printed in a very small font. And what it amounts to is a description of very substantial increases in structures and governance arrangements. And it does, to my mind, really beg the question about whether the amount of resources that will be consumed in process is worth the benefits that are promised. And I think, with long experience in my professional career, the promise of devolution is very, very, very rarely realised. In fact, what happens more often than not is when a devolution is promised, the outcome is a greater degree of centralisation. Just to be slightly constructive about the process, though, from my point, what I would have been more attracted to is if the proposals for the new structures, instead of being for new structures, had focused on the existing bodies that we have now, for example, local delivery units and STPs, which is already a sub-regional structure in place. But it doesn't do that, although it mentions it, but it adds to structures and governance arrangements, and it's not clear what's disappearing. More specifically, I am concerned about the London Capital Estates Board. Capital, very often in the discussion about how this surplus NHS property might be deployed in tackling the housing problems which is described in here. I am doubtful about that, because very often propositions for reconfiguring and improving the NHS estate critically depends upon it's dependent on materialising and utilising capital receipts in order to make the business case successful. So I'd watch with caution any sort of solution you can imagine that the London Estates Board might think that a surplus property, let's say the Wilson or the Sutton site, might be very helpfully deployed in Hackney or Tower Hamlets. And that is something where political processes are in place, especially with the resource allocation between health and housing becoming part of the argument, is a risk. And that would threaten and could easily undermine business cases that we might want to do in the southwest. So, the principles that it's described on page 16 under London arrangements, which are about 15 lines, are entirely admirable and supportable. However, that is singularly at odds when you read it with the other 20 and a half pages. So I remain, apart from that, it's all right.
So, I think you're right to be cautious about it, Peter. I think there are risks with it. Clearly the intention is to move from a position where some of these issues are considered nationally to bring it down to the London level. I do think you're right as well about concerns about receipts from capital estates. I think we just need to be crystal clear that the Wilson and Sutton sites are not considered surplus to requirements. So I just want to make that point, that is not the case. There may be surplus NHS and public sector property in Merton, but those are not on any list that I have seen. In fact, quite the reverse. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Any other questions or comments? Dagmar?
Peter, I think your scepticism is welcome. It's refreshing. We're not just approving, nodding it through. But on balance, I think this is only a memorandum of understanding, so it's not that we are signing in blood to give away all our family silver, and having a place around the table to be part of the future thinking of where devolution might get us is important, and hence I feel if we are position ourselves as the only outsider CCG, we might get disadvantaged. I have probably got most
I think things will proceed as planned. Any other questions or comments? So we're being asked to approve this as a memorandum of understanding. My advice would be it would be wise to approve it, but noting the concerns that we have. Are we as a board happy to do that?
Yep, great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on then to 3.3, which is the month 7 assurance report and scorecard. So this was an item I think we didn't have time to cover at the last governing body meeting, hence it's slightly out of date. But Chris, shall I hand over to you? You're presenting this, is that right?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. So yes, the reason we're seeing this today is because we ran out of time at the last governing body. So I will take the report as read. And the governing body will be seeing an up-to-date report at our next meeting in March. We'll be seeing our online position. So I'll give a very brief overview of recent performance as well. But before I do that, just a general statement about how we handle assurance. So all of our performance and quality measures are discussed in our clinical quality committee in detail, where we look at specific areas of concern or indeed good performance. And we also look at the overall performance of the CCG at our executive management team meetings. And locally I will discuss performance issues with our commissioning managers and also with our providers. So that's how we gather all the performance and quality information. And we also take feedback and notes from the CQRG meetings with all the providers where quality issues are discussed. And we also at Merton host the South West London Performance Group, where we discuss performance measures at a regional level. So to give a very brief overview of performance, obviously this report covers October from a assurance position, but I can give an update, perhaps splitting it between urgent and planned care. Over winter in South West London and in Merton, our providers have remained quite resilient on most days. We didn't have any A&E closures or diversions. And the London Ambulance Service served us extremely well in response times, still the best response times in London. We've worked with our acute providers on a daily basis looking at the system pressures, and there have been days when there has been particular pressure with admitting patients into hospital. Having said that, we still have seen some of the best A&E performance in the country, and I think that's worth the governing body noting the hard work that our acute providers are doing on a day-to-day basis to keep the A&Es running and to keep patients safe. And I've reflected that message back to them that we're extremely grateful for that, and we'll continue to support them as a commissioner and to support the system. On the elective or planned care side, there's good periods and bad periods. I think if we focus on St George's, there are some obvious issues there with around access to elective care in the RTT pathways, and in fact more recently there have been some slips in cancer performance, although there's some very robust and immediate recovery actions that should see those back on track this month and in March. In terms of access to elective surgery at St George's, I have fortnightly performance meetings with them, and they're done in conjunction with Wandsworth CCG. They are in the process of recovery. Their waiting list has started to come down. There's still some gaps in assurance around their abilities to track patients on their waiting list. There's still suspended reporting on waiting times. And NHSI are working inside the trust to work with them to recover that. And we're also looking at the wider system and communicating with GPs around exploring all options when agreeing choice with their patients about where to go. We look at availability and capacity. We also look at the transport options for patients to make sure that they get the most informed choice about where to go and perhaps avoid a long waiting time. So happy to take any questions.
Should I ask you, Claire, as Chair of the Clinical Quality Committee, whether you had any additional comments or points you wanted to make?
I think Chris has covered things pretty quickly there. I think the comment my concern, one of my major concerns in this is the 3 patients waiting over 100 days for cancer treatment. And I know we're talking October, but is there any update that you can give us on the care that they would be receiving?
So, for those specific patients, the messages I've had back from the cancer team at the CSU are all 3 of them are now being fully tracked and on treatment plans. The overall causes of long cancer waits don't appear to be capacity issues. They appear to be breaks in operational practice, perhaps a staff member going sick or failure of diagnostic equipment. And we've made it very clear to Trust that that just isn't acceptable. They should have the resilience and the redundancy within their system to deal with day-to-day pressures. And we've made it clear that actually having good information systems and having a well-stocked team of staff to manage the tracking of patients should mean that you don't have long waiters. We have the capacity to be able to provide cancer treatment to people on time, and I've made that very clear. And when we don't see a satisfactory recovery from the Trust, that's where we will apply contractual actions and agree a remedial action plan, which is explicitly there to protect the patients and to recover the situation as quickly as possible.
I think the other point that the Clinical Quality Committee would raise is the positiveness about A&E. Yes, it's not, none of them are meeting their targets, but they're doing much better than most places in the country. And LAS, the ambulance service, is performing extremely well. So there are some really good things that are happening as well.
Tim.
Sorry, Andrew, just as a clinician dealing with that, and we're sort of it's like accepting mediocrity, isn't it? 15% of patients not making it through a 60-day wait, and just I sit in the committees, I hear that there are meetings and contractual negotiations, but I'm still trying to find a second appointment for a patient who was 2-week ruled for rectal bleeding, gets told by the consultant she needs an urgent colonoscopy, and is then on a 4-week non-specific list to then get it, has not been contacted 4 weeks later, and requires me speaking to the 2-week rule office for simple diagnostics that should be readily available, fairly straightforwardly, with a number of different specialists within the Trust who can deliver that service. And so much so that on a further 4 weeks, sadly, her preparation didn't go well, and therefore she was booked for a further 4 weeks. So we're talking about a 10-week gap for a lady being presented in to even get onto the list, to even start the diagnostic process for her condition, to then having to, it's quicker to go to another Trust, to be re-referred as a 2-week rule wait, to see another consultant and get the colonoscopy she desperately needs, 65-year-old person who needs a test. It really isn't good enough. I know we've asked, I think, in the Clinical Quality Committee to actually focus on cancer, both Merton's strategy for cancer, and we've now re-employed and re-gone through the clinical director roles, and people have been appointed to those roles. It'd be good to hear from that clinical director about our strategy for cancer, and also really to hold particularly St George's to account, perhaps in one of our provider focus meetings we have at the Clinical Quality Committee, to actually hold maybe the coals a bit on this, because these are people. Actually, we all look at numbers and charts and meetings and contracts. And actually, these people are being let down in quite a significant way, and I'm seeing that on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. So I think through our Clinical Quality Committee, I think we're going to try and address cancer as a whole.
Yeah.
So where would that sit then? So are we saying that we are going to have specifically focus on cancer, and how does that sit in the work plan for the Clinical Quality Committee?
We have actually specifically requested that, and if it's not on this month's agenda, it will certainly be on the following month's agenda.
Okay. But point well made. Any other comments or questions from the board? Marek?
One very minor one on page 7, you referred to St George's failing the national standard in September. Did you actually say that?
Yes, actually, they are.
The other thing I just wanted to note is that although the trusts have not been managing to achieve the 95% A&E 4-hour wait broadly, but Epsom and St Helier have actually achieved, if not the 95%, but they've achieved the best result of the three on a number of occasions. Is there any particular reason why Epsom and St Helier seem to be better than the others? Kingston runs a pretty good second. I'm not really going to ask that.
So we asked that question to the Chief Executive of that trust at a private governing body session some months ago, and the starting place would be that both the Chief Executive and the Trust have made A&E performance and the safety of patients and their absolute priority. And I think the thing that they've got most right is the flow through the department. There's often an association made between the availability of beds and the performance of A&E. I don't actually support that association. You will see days in A&E when performance is particularly bad, and there's actually quite a degree of capacity available to admit to, and that's because clinicians won't just admit a patient in order to meet the A&E performance where it's not appropriate to do an admission. What we find works is the flow of patients through the department, the point at which they see a senior doctor, which is now sooner in the pathway, whereas before they would have gone through an administrative process. They would have perhaps seen a triage nurse, a junior doctor, and then only at the point when they see a consultant the decision is made. In A&Es where performance is better, we've seen that pathway reversed, so that the first person you see is the clinical decision maker. I think that's what they've got right at Epsom and Helier.
Is that likely to be replicated elsewhere then?
We're seeing that same structure replicated at St George's, and more often than not, performance in that department is over 90%. So 9 out of 10 people attending A&E will have a decision made within 4 hours. And in Kingston Hospital, where we've seen the performance is not so good, they recognise that the issue there is around flow. And NHSI and NHSE have visited them and will be making recommendations, and the outcome of that will inform on a transformation of that department, which is likely to be a similar change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's very helpful. I think it's also worth just saying, in a roundabout way, there's been a few allusions to some of the operational challenges that St George's have. It is worth noting, when you look at the 4-hour waits, there's significant improvement in their performance, and actually, compared with the rest of the country, they're doing incredibly well. So in the context of an organisation that has had major challenges, to have improved to that degree, I think is really commendable. Okay. Any further questions or comments on that? So we asked to go on, Peter.
So just to the finance dimension of this report is based on I think month 8. Since the last meeting, we've had another finance committee, and what's said here about relatively confident that we can make the required target still holds good, although you have to acknowledge that there are still significant risks to that as we approach the year end. I mean, just to put it in context, you're talking about a budget of 270 million and a variation of less than 0.5%, 0.25% can really disturb the final outcome. So you're really trying to land 270 million on a sixpence, but it's relatively on course, I think. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Chris. Do you?
Yes. So
no, not you, Chris.
Oh.
The other Chris. Chris Finance.
Too many Chris. I would just say, so we include financial reporting in our assurance report for the purposes of giving a balanced view. I don't intend this to be the financial report for the governing body. However, I think it enriches the report when we have a broader view and see the relationship between financial and constitutional equality.
Yes, I understand it, Chris, and it's fine. I was just because there isn't a finance report on this, I thought I'd just give that update since we're approaching the last stages of the year.
And Chris Morton, having been called upon, would you like to make a comment?
Conjuring that image of landing 270 million on a sixpence, it would be a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the risk issue that Peter mentioned, just on page 9 there, the QUIP requirements that they've asked, very much back-end loaded QUIP, and a very, you see that as a very steep trajectory of that, those blue columns and that red line, got that to achieve that. I think that crystallises the size of the risk that we've got in order to land our position.
And we will, of course, be having a full finance report to the next governing body, which is in March.
That's right.
Okay, so we were asked to review that report, which I think we've done. I'm going to move us on now to 3.4 on the agenda, which is the board assurance framework, and this is for review. Andrew.
It is. Thank you, Chair. Again, I think we're in a similar situation that this was on the agenda for January, and the paper is current as at January. There are a number of deadlines which were set for January, which have, obviously the time has now passed. So this is not absolutely the very latest status on all of the risks and issues, but still worthwhile, and it's a part of good governance to make sure we're regularly reviewing those key risks that we identified in our BAF, our Board Assurance Framework, to make sure they're still current. We haven't added any new major risks. What we have to do is just stay on top of the mitigation actions, which obviously, picked up through all of our governance processes. So rather than sort of laboriously going through all of them, are there particular comments or areas of concern that members would like to raise? I think we are going to do a bit more on risks. We've agreed at our executive that we'll take a bit of a focus on risk the next couple of months in particular. But any particular questions or concerns from members of the governing body about the paper as it is?
Okay, so it's obviously a document we've seen before, and this is a document that's looked at EMT on a fairly regular basis. So I'm understanding that the board are happy with what they've seen in terms of understanding the right mitigations are in place for some of these significant risks, and we've been asked to review it. So the board therefore happy that they've reviewed this. When is it next going to come back, Andrew, the board assurance framework? Do you know?
I think the key thing next, given that we're almost in March, is to set objectives for next year and then to refresh the assurance framework. I would suspect many of the risks will still be the risks. We've got to stay within our financial envelopes. We have to deliver the performance outcomes, the quality outcomes, but probably the added opportunity is to think about that as our emerging LDU comes together with Wandsworth. Are there opportunities both to deal with things in a collective way, and are there new risks raised by a merging integration? So I think there's the opportunity to refresh again in March to look at that and to start to think about objectives and new risks. But I think we will be representing this as we close out the year. So I'm not sure that it's due to come back in March. I don't think it comes every time. Is it about, do you see it about roughly once a quarter at governing bodies?
If I may, there's it usually comes in the first governing body meeting after the audit committee, and the audit committee is in March. So if it were possible to, I know you've got a heavy load with all what we're doing at year end, if it were possible to look through the 17, 18 objectives,
yes.
Objectives, and assess the risk on those, and sort of talk that through at audit committee, that would be helpful, which takes place before the next board. Can't remember, I think it's mid-March, the audit committee. Haven't got the date in front of me. I know it's a tight timescale, but a lot of the risks and the issues and mitigations won't be new. It'll just be a refreshment and picking up some of the new developments.
I think that's a safe commitment for us to make, to at least with the existing BAF, to look at the 17, 18 challenges. But I do think as we form that LDU up, there may just be a couple, maybe a merger and integration risk we've never picked up before that might just have to come on. But I think let's have those conversations on those risk forums and keep it live, and I think those challenges are appropriate as they come.
Fine.
Okay. Thank you. So we've reviewed that. I've not been notified of any other business. I haven't been notified of any questions in advance. Are there any questions from the public on any of the issues that we've discussed today? I don't want to open it up to general questions, but any of the things we've covered today.
You were talking earlier about CCG borderlining and having similar attitudes to treatments that you intend to cease. I understand that Croydon, Richmond and yourselves have agreed to, and the others are likely to agree to, a pause in IVF treatment while any consultations that might have to happen, and you are looking to perhaps ceasing it after that pause for all but exceptional cases. How does this sit with St Helier Hospital trumpeting the opening of a wonderful new assisted fertility and IVF clinic opened by Professor Winston and saying, ask your doctor to refer you? How do those two things sit together? If all the local CCGs that use St Helier are saying no IVF, and yet St Helier is saying, come and get your IVF here in this £750,000 new unit. How do those two things sit together?
Good question.
Very good question. It's a good question. So I wouldn't talk to the other CCG's particular strategies. We use up to 4 different providers for our roughly 150 people who go through each year. And remembering that IVF is just one component of a fertility pathway. So as we've identified previously, women or couples having trouble conceiving need lots of investigations, lots of workup. That's still to be NHS funded under all the proposals we put forward. What we've talked about is potentially limiting the in vitro fertilisation component. So there are lots of parts of the pathway that will still need to occur. And I understand those specialist fertility units do a lot more than just IVF.
But they actually mention IVF in their publicity blurb.
Yes.
IVF, it's assisted fertility and IVF, several times in the article. They're talking IVF and they're saying, come and get your IVF here and get your doctor to refer you. And yet you're saying GPs must not, other than in exceptional circumstances, refer people to IVF. The two things don't sit together unless we're talking about £750,000 unit in St Helier for private patients only. How do you, as doctors, feel about that being an outcome?
Well, so what we're not doing is asking GPs not to refer people who have fertility problems. So we're absolutely still expecting people with fertility problems to be appropriately investigated. In terms of any proposals that restrict access to medical procedures as GPs, doesn't sit comfortably with us. We'd like all our patients to be able to access any procedure that might be of benefit to them. As commissioners of healthcare with responsibility for the budget, we know we have to make difficult decisions with a finite resource, and obviously the issue around access to IVF treatment is one that we are considering amongst a range of other things for how we make best use of resources, and that conversation is going on across southwest London. So we're trying to do it in a joined up way with the other CCGs. Obviously up to now we have run at slightly different paces. We're trying to bring that together in a common view. Epsom St Helier's publicity of their centre is obviously independent from that process, and I agree with you that it doesn't seem to particularly align with the conversations we're having at the moment.
I mean, is this just indicative of other things that might be going on? I mean, you're talking about stopping hip and knee operations. They're available in our hospitals. Presumably, again, that'll only be for private patients. I, as a taxpayer and as a stakeholder in the NHS, not happy that the services I've helped to pay for, along with the rest of the public, should now only be restricted to private patient use. This is morally incorrigible.
So certainly I can respond to that. We're not stopping hip and knee operations. What we're looking at is the criteria that people need to fit to have a hip and knee operation. That's to try and make sure that those people who do go ahead to have a really significant procedure with quite a high risk of complication are those most likely to benefit. So I think that's quite different from the conversation around IVF. Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. I think they're very pertinent. I'm going to need to draw the meeting to a close because we have slightly run over. If I can just say the date of the next meeting, which will be a full governing body meeting, is on the 23rd of March.